Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jet Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
Listen up, nerds. We're doing pen and paper stuff. The Paladins of Podcast are back. And rolling the dice on new content, upgrades to nothing, and a few missing pages from the rule books. Introducing Joshua Johnson, the man behind... Wait, where did those notes go? Follow Rob and Josh as they navigate the Outer Planes and anywhere in between on the Epic Table Games audio show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Epic Table Games audio show with your Paladins of Podcast. I've got some bad news. We've lost Josh. He decided to step away, but you still got me, Rob. And even better news, we got somebody who's very much so willing to step in. I'm going to let them take the floor, introduce themselves, and we're going to jump right in as though nothing happened.
Hey there. My name is Craig. I've been playing these games for about 2 decades now, and I'm really happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem, Greg. It's actually really exciting because you have not just 20 years of the experience, but you also are actively in the game community as a designer full-time. It's what you do. You write, design, develop. I mean, it's more than just getting your feet wet. You've been doing it for quite a while.
That is true, yes. So I am a professional game designer. I've worked in video games for a long time. And right now, I'm working on my own video game, and I also love writing my own tabletop stuff. So it is my full-time occupation. It is my life's work. I love this stuff.
Great. Now, thinking deep dive for our audience members, because you're new. In fact, you're actually removed from my inner circle of friends by an entire country, which is fun.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Yeah.
What kind of games do you really enjoy playing when you're at the table? What kind of games would you consider your least favorite? And what's something that you always want to try but never get an opportunity to do so?
Okay, most common, favorite, and least favorite. All right, so by and large, these days, I run a lot of OSR-style fantasy games. I didn't grow up playing 2nd edition or anything earlier than that they touch on. A lot of BX stuff is where those roots are. I came into the hobby around the summer of 2000 playing 3rd edition D&D. That was my introduction. I branched out pretty wildly from there. But these days I run a lot of Dungeon Crawl Classics. I run a lot of Worlds Without Number. A lot of Kevin Crawford stuff is a big favorite of mine. I love running a lot of different things, but the sort of lingua franca, the most common stuff, is that fantasy, sort of pseudo-medieval role-playing stuff with just enough weird thrown in there to get us outside the realm of, muddy peasants and, death in the dark. I would like a reminder of the next part of the question.
That's all right. What kind of game system or setting would you really like to play in, but you just never seem to get the chance to do so? For example, mine is Space Marines.
All right. No. Tell me more about your dream Space Marine setting. I want to hear about it.
Oh my God. So everybody knows that I am like this crazy, ridiculous min-max power gamer kind of person. And I really like to kick in the door, blow shit up, and loot the body kind of play. And while I've been accused of wanting to win D&D, it's really, I just like to have fun making a mess of things and lots of shenanigans. So Space Marines, I'm thinking, I love the style and the theme of Warhammer 40K with the attitude of Starship Troopers. Just constant blood, guts, and mayhem.
I have good news for you. That game exists. Have you played Deathwatch?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's the game you're describing. You play Space Marines. Yeah. So it came out of the 40K RPG line. And yeah, Deathwatch. They did Dark Heresy. We're not going to talk about Dark Heresy 2nd Edition. And they did Rogue Trader, and they did Only War. So, Dark Heresy is you're playing Agents of an Inquisitor, and Only War is you're playing Guardsmen. And Rogue Trader is you're playing preposterously wealthy dynastic members of a Rogue Trader house, and you go ruin economies, and it's actually kind of a blast.
All right.
But Deathwatch is their swing. Oh man, I hope I'm remembering it, because there's Deathwatch, which I think is the Space Marines one, and then there's the one where you play like Chaos Marines, or you play like actual heretics. But assuming that I have not, farted my brain out the back of my head, that's the one where you actually play a detachment of Space Marines, and you can play like a chaplain, or you can play a Terminator, or all this stuff. The thing is, I haven't actually played it myself, so I'm all getting this secondhand. But
That's okay.
That's the direction you want to go. So apparently my contribution to the podcast is going to be endless streams of recommendations.
Love it. I love
that. And possibly maxing out my microphone by talking too closely to it.
We'll get it nailed down.
I really love cyberpunk settings, but, I'm constantly struggling trying to figure out how to play Shadowrun without actually enduring the Shadowrun mechanical system. Tried it for a very long time, and that is a fight in and of itself. But at the moment, I'm actually pretty itchy to try some cosmic horror. So
really,
yeah, I have done so much fantasy, and I love fantasy. I love dark fantasy and grim and high fantasy. I love all of that stuff. Makes my heart sing. But I really haven't touched on horror, and I'm aware that Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, like these things have evolved right alongside of, the Titan in the Room of Dungeons and Dragons and its ilk. But I've never touched on it. So right now I've probably got like 20,000 words facing me. I ordered a bunch of Call of Cthulhu stuff and Delta Green stuff, and I'm just trying to immerse myself in it. I don't have a campaign planned. I don't even have players picked out, but I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, that's fair.
The thing that tripped me off for it is supposedly one of the greatest pre-written campaigns to exist, according to a bunch of reviews, is Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is a 1920s era sort of Call of Cthulhu game that's been republished over and over. It's got like a bunch of different editions. That's actually what I'm super excited about right now. There's other stuff, but I probably don't want to keep going on this particular topic for the next, 30 minutes.
That's all right. I get it. It's one of those things, because when you mentioned Call of Cthulhu, I love the game. I love the mythos. I love the artwork. And there's so many different Cthulhu-based games out there right now. And they're really popular, not just with small crowds of niche market people, but they're really popular in the greater scheme of things when it comes to tabletop games. And overall, I think when people really look at the idea of horror, they go straight to Call of Cthulhu. And I want to say that even in that aspect, we've taken I'll say possible horror. Like one of my favorite games right now is Morkborg, and it's an OSR game. And while I could definitely say it's more horror, like it's definitely grotesque in its own right, or Lamentations of the Flame Princess, they seem to go in the direction of horror as death metal, and it's kind of created that death metal RPG genre. And I think that's fitting for that specific style, taking it out of the horror genre and leaving that to something closer to what you would consider Call of Cthulhu or other games in that sense. So yeah, I think it's an incredible poised opportunity, and to have so much of it right there but no campaign planned is kind of difficult.
No, I think that even if and this is something that I would actually recommend for anybody if they're trying to sort of expand their capacity as a game master, is if you've got the time and it's enjoyable to you, read stuff you have no intention of ever running. It'll sit there in the back of your head, and it'll be another arrow in your quiver. I actually did end up touching on sort of a cross between the sort of cyberpunk sci-fi stuff and horror. Anyway, my sort of first tickle into the area was when I touched on Mothership. The Mothership RPG. Have you touched on any of this at all? Have you looked at it?
I've looked at it, but I can't say I remember anything.
So it's an easy one to read because checking through it, the rules are not very heavy. It's a great time. They just successfully ran a Kickstarter for their first edition. Their first foray was kind of a zero edition. Their 0th edition. Mothership is sci-fi horror, and it's not that full-blown like, Morkborg Lamentations grotesque horror. It has the room for a lot of other stuff. So it's a great way to sort of dip your feet in there, especially if you want to do, the explicit influences are things like Alien, but the first one, not Aliens, where, now it's all Marines and automatic weapons and that kind of thing.
Right. More horror versus kick in the door.
Yeah.
So
Although
I get it.
You can use it to run both.
Yeah, and I think one of the downsides to a lot of the systems out there is that they develop a setting and play style that suits most parties, and the parties generally don't deviate too much. Like, very rarely does somebody pick up one system and say, I'm going to just completely reflavor this to do something else. And it's a bummer. That's really the biggest downside. And it's not a setting issue or a rule system. It's really personal parties. When people are at their table, they become so I don't want to say laser focused, but almost have blinders on, like Pathfinder's high fantasy settings. We're very rarely going to use that for something else, but it's doable. It's doable with anything.
I've to disagree slightly. I actually think that it's a common problem you run into in conversations about 5th edition D&D. A lot of people come in and they touch on 5th edition D&D and they think like, this is awesome. I love this hobby. This is what role playing is. But because it's the only thing in their repertoire, they think, well, how can I make 5th edition D&D, which is a good game and a very specific one in terms of what it can do well, how can I bend and crank that case into doing some other things? Like, it's made for kicking monsters in the teeth, taking their stuff, and having a way to express your sort of power fantasy with your player options. And it does that pretty damn well. It doesn't do old school dungeon crawling very well, which is sort of surprising if you expect that it will, and it doesn't really do horror super well as a mechanical system, but it can be made to do that. And I think that the further you drive that away from the core competency, you run into more and more problems, when the easier answer might very well be, you want a game that runs horror in space? Maybe 5th edition D&D isn't the right call. Maybe you want Mothership. And so it becomes an issue of like exposure to other options.
I agree with that. And one thing I've noticed a lot of times is in some of the Facebook groups or the Reddit groups that I'm a part of, a lot of members who are, I'll say, within the first few years of the hobby of gaming, who only have that 5th edition exposure, are looking for ways to add more rules into the system, to do more things, so they just have a definitive answer. And it seems like what they're searching for are rules from older systems that have been cut out to streamline the entire process. It's one of those things that I guess eventually you'll generally see a full circle, but in my position, because I've stuck with such of the like the 3.0 and the 3.5 generation of games, that
kind of lineage of games.
Yeah. My preference in the I like to say the 3rd edition OGL license, because that's what everything was published under. Came down to, I've never given up those rules, so hearing that people are trying to put them back, I was floored when they were taken out. It's just kind of funny on my side, but
you do start to see sort of cycles when you play for a really long time, and you see publication cycles and what's popular, what sort of sinks to the background, what comes up again, which is probably a way for me to just sort of, scratch my graying beard and say, well, you'll see when you're my age, that kind of thing. But those cycles do exist. People are like, oh, this is popular. Oh, but what if we had this? Well, we used to have that. We got rid of it. Oh, we want it back. Okay, fair enough. And I actually have remembered the other part of your initial question, which was what do I not like to run or play in? So with your permission, I will get mad about the fate system.
Okay. Yeah.
I can't figure it out. I can't figure out a way for it to be. So I'm specifically talking about fate. Fate accelerated is, I guess, a little bit a different thing, but I guess not really mad. but I am ready to deploy my strong opinions on Fate as a game system when you are ready for that.
Oh, I'm sure we'll dive into it. Because I've got limited experience in Fate, but I was just recently looking at their book. I got both the core toolkit and the accelerated toolkit
to kind of get the gorilla on the front, right?
I don't remember. I'd have to go look.
I think it's got the cyborg gorilla on the front. It's like a gorilla in a karate gi or something like that.
That sounds approximately correct. I can't see it from here. Like, I can see the book, I can't see the cover.
Fair enough.
But I've understood that the Fate system uses the fudge dice, and that's essentially X amount of dice, more successes than fails. Whatever's left over is your result, I guess. I don't know. It seems overly simple yet complicated at the same time. I haven't dug into it.
Fate is a deliberately generic system. You can use it to play pretty much anything that you want. Apropos of nothing, I guess. The issue that I take with Fate is that it requires a deceptively large amount of creative effort from the players, whereas most other games that I have come across, and maybe it's just a personal issue, have a much clearer differentiation between what's required from the game master, the referee, as you will, or the players. The game master is expected to produce a lot of the content, and the players are expected to react to that. And that ping pong back and forth is, GM says, here's the situation, player asks for clarification or actions, the GM responds to that, and you go back and forth. Fate asks that the players are as committed to the production of what is happening in the scene as the GM is. They have a meta currency that they can choose to say, well, I say that a character that I happen to know shows up in this scene, and that's as legitimate as the GM saying a character you know shows up in this scene. Or you can say, in this corner, it turns out, so long as it's plausible, we're in a secret government laboratory, there is a power conduit in this place, and I want to use my ability to mess with electronics to overload that. The GM didn't put that there. It might even be plausible, but it systematizes that with a meta currency to allow that. He said, having not played because he's frustrated by the system for many years. So hopefully my memory is as good as I hope it is.
That's fair. I honestly, I think I've come across a system that's semi-similar. And it sounds like one of those situations where in a perfect world, everybody's on the same page and the game would flow smoothly. But I could also see it not working on a myriad of sessions all the time.
It's weird.
Actually.
I think you've got the gist of it, and it's weird because it's not surface level disagreements that lead to weird things happening, because any role-playing game, because it's collaborative and participatory, can run into that kind of thing. The weird issue that I run into it with it is that if everyone isn't on almost the exact same part of the page with regard to genre conventions, then you start running into a lot of really dissonant ideas. If you're playing a noir detective story, and the issue is that, the protagonists are investigators, and they're going to get out of their problems with, if they get cornered by gangsters, they're going to find a window and escape out the back. They might, punch out a couple of guys, but genre-wise, it would be super weird if they were like, and then we killed everyone with heavy weaponry. They'd be like, okay, I guess you could say that you're in a Tommy gun warehouse, and there's the crate, but the genre shifts, and maybe you're okay with that. But if you're trying to run a very specific genre-focused game, then you're like, all right, we either got to go with that and see where it gets squirrely, or we have to say, all right, hold up, we got to talk about this.
Right. I know my friends, my players, super well, and that is exactly that rabbit hole that it would go down every time.
I can't even get mad about that. If it's like, hey, you have the capacity as a player and a character to say, yes, the footlocker at your feet does have a howitzer shell. How are you going to solve your problem? Well, it turns out fire solves a lot of problems.
Yeah. Nice.
So it requires a sort of creative self-discipline if you want to keep the genre. So that's it's not bad. It's just deceptively difficult.
Yeah, I can see that. It'd be something I'd have to try with what I would consider other storytellers, people who really like to storytell.
Yes, this is not me saying don't play Fate. This is me definitely saying play it and see how you feel about it.
Right. Deliberately make choices to stay on the same page. That's the note I'm getting out of this.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we kind of touched on it briefly, is when we're looking at starting up a new campaign or a new idea, what's your process? Because I am starting a new campaign, first edition Pathfinder, for my core group of players the first weekend of October. So I have just about a month to go on the rest of my planning. And I'm trying something new this time. Ooh. And it's not something I usually do. So a lot of times I'll just
What do you normally do?
All right. So normally I'll decide on like what house rules we're going to use, what general effects are going to happen, what kind of things I'm going to restrict and allow. And this time I'm actually getting player input on what they want and how they want to play. So I'm trying to set up essentially an expectation of exactly what they're going to be doing, looking at, and how the game is going to flow. I'm doing it through Google Forms, so I actually have documentation like, nope, you kind of agreed to this. This is what you said you were going to do, and we're going to stick to that because this is what we're doing. And it includes things like the next.
Yeah, what kind of stuff goes in the Google form? Tell me about this.
Well, the first one I sent out was pretty much trying to figure out scheduling and a few of the basic house rules I use. Like one of the house rules I use all the time is max hit points per player, per level, all the time, just forever. They're heroes. You know, right. They should be absolutely hardy. But one of the ones that I'm developing right now for a house rule is kind of unique in itself. Let me bring it up here, because getting your input on this would also be really, really neat before it's presented to my players, and it may cause me to
do it. Let's do some homebrew. What do you got?
All right. Now, you know what? Google Docs on my phone is ridiculous. Let me just open a web browser, and I don't mean to take extra time here. Just
with the magic of editing, it takes no time at all, unless we don't edit it.
I don't edit it.
All right, I'll do a little soft shoe. It's all right.
All right. All right, so it looks like this is the first one I sent out. And it's I was trying to get the feel of theme. I'm like, I don't know what theme I want to go with, so I'm thinking somewhere between medieval fantasy and steampunk, right? I mean, we're looking at hundreds of years apart. And eventually, I think we're just going to take the entire world, and it's going to be whatever setting goes, you know?
So are you working off of default of the Pathfinder Galarian setting?
Nope.
Oh, okay. So we're going with some custom stuff. We're just using Pathfinder rules.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. So it's completely a homebrew system, not just a homebrew setting, and yeah, looking at certain places, we'll have the Victorian era steampunk airships where technology is replacing magic just because of ease and universal ability to utilize it.
Gotcha.
But yet other places will be super feudalized and whatnot. The only thing that I don't include in most of my games, in Pathfinder specifically, is the gunslinger class and firearms, not because they're unbalanced, but because they just generally suck compared to other options. Like playing a gunslinger in Pathfinder, in my opinion, you generally have to waste way too many feats to become super effective or efficient, whereas you could be an archer and really outdo any potential as a gunslinger. So
it's funny, we the last Pathfinder game I played, we played the Iron Gods adventure path, and I actually played a gunslinger up through like level 16. And I was going to say, what are you talking about? I was immensely powerful. I was the prime damage dealer. And then I remembered that my GM's home rules were, if you take a feat in a feat chain, you automatically get all the rest of the feats in that chain when you qualify for them. So
oh, nice.
Maybe my experience was not the baseline one. I
would definitely say not, because that entire feat tree is ridiculous. ridiculous for all
I
of that.
ended that game at 15th level with something like, God, I think I had 30 feats at that point. It was. I needed a spreadsheet to keep track of it. But I digress. Nobody wants to hear about our old characters unless they ask. You were telling me about what you're trying to figure out for your homebrew and your setting.
Right. So I got a few house rules already kind of written down that I like to utilize and getting their opinions. One of them is from an old third-party Pathfinder compatible. It's called Common Tongue. Are you familiar with that?
The ability or the publication?
The publication of the rule called Common Tongue. All right. So the premise behind Common Tongue is that essentially everybody understands and knows Common. Whether they choose to use it or not is up to them. And every language is a formative derivative of Common by some degree, some greater than others. So, for example, while you may be speaking to a dragon, for instance, they will understand Common, but they may never speak in Common. They may only speak Draconic. And if you don't understand the Draconic derivative, you don't understand what they're speaking. You may be able to understand the context or tone, but it's just, it allows for universal communication, so we don't have to have an entire party of people in an area that nobody can communicate with, because that gets frustrating.
It's an interesting. It's sort of like a linguistic flowchart where everything is a derivative or a dialect. I mean I love linguistics, so like that's a really cool setting premise to drop on them. So that's neat, and it does solve an interesting problem.
Yeah, and I try to make things semi-easy for my players in general, where I try to up the difficulty for other things. A lot of other house rules I like to kind of interact for are things I end up having to take a whole lot of responsibility on keeping track of. And one of them that I want to see if they're feeling about is sanity points. So kind of a score with base of X, and as they experience the horrors of the world, they take afflictions based on how often they see it, how much they develop, and that score fluctuates up, down. They gain small afflictions that eventually get worse. They can recover from them. Things that just add to character development. But again, it's something I would have to do all the groundwork, all the legwork for. I'd have to constantly be keeping track of it all. I like the idea of it, but I want to see how my players feel. And similar to sanity, I'm thinking about introducing addiction. So I have an idea for a potion. I'm going to call it Midnight Oil. And during the night phase of any particular day, you can take Midnight Oil and it will give you a bonus to all of your skill checks through that 8-hour period.
Why does it only work at night then?
Magic.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm gonna wave my hand here and just say magic.
All right.
But because you get that plus whatever to your skill checks, anybody who's a skill monkey is going to want to utilize it frequently, which is essentially a form of addiction. And I'm figuring negative consequences based upon addictions. And everybody likes to go to the bar and drink. So why not push to the point where if you're always drinking, you are more effective while intoxicated and less effective when not intoxicated.
So, I guess my question for you is, okay, so we've got the idea of a sanity system and we've got the idea of an addiction system. What is your goal for including these systems in the campaign? Is it, like, because I think it's cool is a reason, but the mechanics that are present are going to heavily influence what the players actually do. They're going to incentivize some choices and disincentivize some other stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, if you have no encumbrance system, if there's no penalty at all, and you're like, I don't care, carry as much as you want, it's just not worth keeping track of, then every player will be incentivized to grab every single thing that they come across and never worry about it. But if you say...
I absolutely do that too.
Fair enough. But if you say, hey, I'm actually going to keep fairly close track of encumbrance, not in a way that's irritating, but in a way that's at least useful at the table. You know, one of my preferences is slot-based encumbrance. We're not tracking pounds, we're not tracking ounces. Oh, God help you. Right. But like a one-handed weapon, 1 slot. A two-handed weapon, 2 slots. Fine. There's a pretty easy way to keep track of it. Suddenly the players need to care about this stuff, because if you're overburdened, your speed's cut in half. If you're, maxed out, that will directly change what they do. So the question that I have for you is, how do you see things, let's just pick insanity, for example. How do you see sanity changing what the players decide to do, how it weights their incentives to act as characters?
Well, with these...
Sorry, I
these
whacked my microphone.
That's all right. That's all right. With these two in particular, what I'm really hoping for is deeper character development and essential player investment in their characters. Mm-hmm. I don't want no consequence for a lot of their actions, because I see the same sort of actions with limited consequences. So the idea of sanity, as you had specifically asked about, let's say they get to a point now where they develop a small affliction, and it's no longer roll a will save. It's, you're I described to the character, they're positive, they're hearing voices in the distance. Make perception checks to really try to make out what they're saying, even though there are none, the rest of the party can't hear them. It starts to affect individual characters very individually, for a lack of better words. And I'm hoping that doing it that way will allow that character development to continue to a deeper resonation between the player as well as integration into the world.
Okay, to make sure I understand, it sounds like what you're trying to do is give players more hooks to justify their characters' reactions to the world after they've been exposed to sanity melting stuff. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's still mechanical effects on there. So generally speaking, the specifics aren't ultimately they aren't actually super important for this question. But are there meaningful negative mechanical effects for having your sanity reduced, regardless of your efforts to resist that effect? If in the end your sanity is, damaged or reduced, is that going to hurt your character?
Mechanically, yeah, it would eventually lead to penalties, but it would take a while. We would look at something simple as eventually, after you have experienced enough horrors and have had a lack of recovery time, you would not be as effective in certain combative situations or certain social situations. Obviously, like paranoid individuals would have a very hard time in a diplomatic setting, especially if they have an aversion to any kind of authority.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think through this, the way that this system, what this system would then do. So the players are going to know, okay, I have a sanity score. Being exposed to stuff that messes with that sanity score is eventually going to penalize me. So as a player, what I would probably say is, gosh, I'm going to do everything in my power to avoid having that sanity score damaged, or doing everything that I can to make sure that that sanity score is restored if that's possible. I don't know if that is. Maybe time and rest and drugs, for example, or whatever can restore that. But avoiding the damage in the first place is always easier than repairing it afterwards. So then my follow-up question is, okay, you're using a sanity setting. It does feel like we're kind of moving toward that Cthulhu gaslight kind of stuff, which is super cool. I love that. And I know that Pathfinder has a bunch of, they've got like their like occult horror book. I forget the exact name of it, but they have a sort of
horror.
Oh, is it literally occult horror? Okay, fine.
Occult horror.
So then the question becomes, okay, they're going to be exposed to sanity-damaging stuff. Does your game require that they do that? Because if I remember my players in the past, and they were like, well, we got to go do X, but it's going to require that we get exposed to sanity-blasting horrors, I'm plugging my ears with wax. We're going to have one guy who's got a blindfold on. Like, we're going to, oh God, we know the monster's in there and we know getting exposed to seeing it is bad. We're going to burn the house down. Oh no, we needed to like find a clue in there? Nah, not worth it. Not doing it. We're going to just burn the place down. That kind of, you can probably expect that kind of stuff is going to happen. Do you think that makes sense?
Yes, and some of that I'm hoping for and expecting. So, like, I want players to think along those lines. Hey, let's. I don't want to hear some of this horrible stuff. So, wax in the ears. I know that seeing this is going to just tank my sanity score. So, I'm going to go through blindfolded. It's a creative solution that allows for additional opportunities to change the gameplay from standard, and I like that aspect. And again, I think overall that gaslighting it, like you would say, kind of the way the Call of Cthulhu will do it. It's interesting. Some people will say it takes away player agency, which is why this questionnaire gets to come into play anyway.
To be very clear, I meant gaslight as a setting and a descriptor for that, not the act of gaslighting someone.
Fair. Call of Cthulhu ends up doing both, so that's fair.
Yeah, that's actually true. Okay, fair enough, yeah.
So yeah, and having it set up where it gives them those out-of-the-box situations, and I do expect a lot of times they're going to avoid things. And no, I'm not going to say, yes, you absolutely have to go do this. I don't railroad my players and force them into certain settings or situations, but imagine something like current modern day news, for example. Years ago, a tragic event happened with news reporters and a beheading. And whether or not you intended to watch the entire video, if you did, it's incredibly disturbing and it sticks with you. Or when you're perusing YouTube, for example, and you don't know what you're watching, and all of a sudden 6 gang members get gunned down, like it just hits you. Like, oh shit, it's too late to turn this off. There will be events and news and information like that, but it's not going to be effective to the point where
I see, yeah.
Yeah, like if you come across a town that has been decimated, I mean, sure, it's in ruins, but if you turn the corner and there are piles of mutilated bodies strung across the street, like, you don't expect it. Again, yes, there's a way to decrease the score. Time, like you said, possibly drugs. What I don't want is just a paladin to be like, cure affliction, wave my hands, make it better. And it
sounds like there's going to be that it sounds like the thought needs to be put in to be like, all right, well, what about the other standard ways of curing something that would be a mental affliction? We have rules in Pathfinder for insanity and that kind of thing, and there are spells that can directly attend to that. You may want to have an answer in mind for, well, why can't this spell fix this? This seems like a mental affliction too. What's different about it? That doesn't mean, it seems like a reasonable question as a player.
Yeah, and I think something like, why can't I just wave my hands and use this spell to cure it? It would be most mental afflictions based on the sanity score are procured over time. Like, they are long-lasting, ingrained effects that are more of a personality disorder in the game system than an actual affliction. And that cure requires finding a way to undo your own mental attachment to it. It's like it's complicated in depth, and
I think I have a suggestion, and I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah,
I think that so it sounds like you still want sanity stuff to change to actually have a mechanical effect. To literally change what the players weight and what they do, and how they approach things in the game world, for it to have some teeth. But you also want it to sort of stand apart, so that it's like, well, okay, I take a -4 to my initiative because I'm panicky now, and I'm too twitchy. But it can't be cured by other spells like heal, as written, if I remember correctly, cures all physical and mental ailments, but not sanity in this case, or at least as you're describing it. So what if it didn't have mechanical effects? Or rather, that could be measured as bonuses or penalties to certain things. What if it was something like, okay, you have a sanity score. It has certain thresholds. As your score is reduced and it passes, you get your will saves to resist these, or whatever mechanic you want to resist the reduction of your sanity score. But as it passes certain thresholds, it doesn't impose penalties to initiative or attack rolls or anything like that. It adds things. It says, okay, your character now has a new tendency. If you trust your players to express this descent into madness in their role-playing to develop their character, then having a couple things that are their tendencies to begin with, like, okay, well, I grew up on a farm, so I have some sort of concern for animals, and I had a large family, so familial relationships are important to me. Like, that is a baseline for the character description. I don't know how much you want to put into to ask your players to generate, but they have some idea of what their character believes or does not believe, or would act or would not do. But this descent into madness starts adding new specific active choices to their tendencies. It says, okay, well, in addition to caring about animals, caring about familial structures, now you cannot abide not doing things. You've been cornered. Your helplessness was something that triggered this reduction in your sanity. So now you must always act. It doesn't matter what you do, but your character can no longer abide sitting there and waiting for something to happen. And adding that as a very explicit change to how they portray their character. If you think that your specific players would react well to that and would be like, yeah, because you can't sit there and be like, and if you don't do that, bad things happen to you, I'm going to penalize you, take damage, whatever. But if you think that they'd be up for that, that may be actually easier to adjudicate in the moment than remembering yet another modifier to battle stuff. And it would even affect things outside of combat.
I like that. And I think that I trust my players themselves enough that at least I could split the party half and half. Half of them would absolutely have no problem keeping track and doing this. The other half would probably just completely forget. But I like it. And it's one of those things that, again, I mean, still just kind of working out. I know I like the base, and I think moving to a threshold and having the additive tendencies is really phenomenal because, like you had said as well, keeping track of things like I take -2 to my initiative because of whatever. It's the kind of thing. It
quickly outgrows the post-it note that you've got attached to your character sheet of like, all right, here's all the crap I have to remember. Oh my god.
Right. And in the general idea of the base thought that I had, it was I hadn't gotten much farther than things like potential to hear voices or sounds or grow paranoia, and those can all be a part of the added tendencies where they're not taking away anything, but they're just modifying character behavior. And I think it's a great blend for not only where I envision it going, but to make it simpler to do as well. It's a fantastic suggestion.
One of the reasons why I think that it would be... it has a very low overhead cost, I think. Because explicitly if you say this is added to your tendencies, this is something that you find yourself compelled to do, not don't do this thing, because it's very easy to avoid a negative. It's like, well, you're never going to charge in first through the door. And they're like, okay, but what about a window? What about a barn door? What about a cave? But if it says, no, you find yourself motivated to do X, express that the way you think your character would. It's a lot more open-ended, and you can describe it in sort of a natural language. You don't have to sit there and be like, oh man, now I got to parse game mechanics here to figure out whether I'm doing it correctly. So there's just less overhead. Anyway, that's the pitch.
I dig it. I mean, your opinion is absolutely phenomenal. It's insightful and helpful. That's really important.
I'm just some guy.
I get that, but again, I mean, like you said, 2 decades worth of experience, you get to pick up some stuff. And whereas I'm branching out, I'm overcomplicating things. You're giving me ways to keep it simplified. And we had even talked about how other groups try to include rules that existed previously or somewhere else into games nowadays. And I'm similarly doing the same thing. You're making it easy on me, and I cannot complain about that.
So to be completely clear about this, one of the reasons why I thought about this just now is because I'm reading through Delta Green right now. Delta Green is a modern day sort of conspiracy Lovecraftian horror game where you play members of this disavowed government group that is out there to sort of erase evidence of mythos stuff, of the unnatural. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is the way that it handles that descent into madness and how it affects your relationships that you value. Your character is sustained literally when your character is exposed to the unnatural and they take sanity damage. They can either just take it on the chin, and when your sanity is at 0, you can't play that character anymore. You are as unplayable as if you had died. But you can reduce the impact in Delta Green of taking that hit to your sanity by instead mentally offloading that trauma onto one of your existing bonds, your wife, your relationship with your children, your relationship with your other professional organizations. Your relationships with other people suffer because you offload that trauma onto it. And there's a mechanical representation of this but you directly endure less sanity damage as a result. The game is about your descent into isolation and madness and darkness, and it's super, super well written. That specific mechanic. But the way that feeds into it, like, go read it. Like, just read the quick start manual to look at how they do that and see the way that those gears intermesh. But I read that, the other day, so it's like foremost in my head.
It's super fresh. I dig it. That's one of those things. And then I guess one more that I'm trying to kind of piece together is the way magic works a little bit.
Big topic.
And
all right.
It is a big topic, and usually I'll play a high fantasy, low magic style game just because magic tends to complicate things. I don't mind if my players have a bunch of magic. I don't generally control a lot of magic because I give my players as many opportunities to be overpowered as they can handle. But what I'm thinking is that because a lot of people, a little bit of history, D&D has the weave. That's where magic comes from. And in Pathfinder, it's just collective energy.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you're talking like Forgotten Realms, like Mystra, like that kind of stuff? All right, cool. All right.
Yeah. So in Pathfinder, because it's collective energy, it doesn't come from what feels or sounds like a tangible source like the weave. It's not like particles of dust. You can't see it. It's small, random energy floating around. So my proposed changes are that you no longer need the visual components. You don't need to do the hand motions. You don't need to do the funny dances. You don't have to wave, wiggle. No, you don't need spirit fingers. Okay. So essentially, because I'm eliminating that, it's going to eliminate the meta magic feat that does that. But the trade-off is that anytime you cast magic, you can visibly see the magic, and it looks like heat distortion. So it's that invisible wave of distortion.
You get that mirage shimmer,
Yeah, shimmer. That's the next proposed idea that I have. And then depending if they're spontaneous arcane casters or divine casters will kind of change the flavor of that visual description, pending. And that's an idea that I'm toying with, particularly because as we eventually get into that world building, in my mind, that visualization plays into the world.
Tell me why. Tell me more about that.
So as I world build, I think very visually, cinematically, and as I envision it in my head, kind of piece it together. Large amounts of magic that create too much distortion, or when too many casters get together to do something incredibly massive, that distortion and energy consumption does allow us to say that much magical energy has actually disrupted and caused a harmful effect on this area of the world. You are more than welcome to go investigate. There's a lasting effect. It destroyed the trees. It destroyed the fauna and flora. Or it healed, vice versa, pending. And that radius of effect has that visual to it now. And that's kind of how it plays out in my head, is that I can actually, I physically see it instead of it just being spirit fingers and a few words, shoot lightning bolts out of my eyeballs, that kind of thing.
Okay, so you're establishing a really clear visual thread. If players know magic produces a mirage shimmer, and the greater the quantity and the intensity of the magic, the more shimmer it does. And so if we see that elsewhere, we'll be like, hey, that's magic. We know about this. So that's cool. Right. I'm certainly there for that. I don't think you even need rules for it, to be honest. I don't think you need to worry about... How many times have you known anybody to ever actually take the still spell meta magic feat?
Quite a few.
Really?
In most magic casters that I end up having in a party, yeah.
I believe you. I've never come across anybody bothering to take
it.
No. They're usually more concerned with the end result of it. I guess maybe the DMs that I've played for or with or even run myself, it's never been an issue of like, oh, well, your hands are bound, or like it's super important that you don't move while you do this. So it's actually super interesting. Do you have any insight into why people take it frequently?
I guess once once a few people figured out the intricacies of Pathfinder's grappling system, and it became a bigger issue now that they decided to grapple for whatever reason. I had to respond very similar in kind to do more grappling, or I don't like to just straight up kill a lot of my players. I will end up tying them up, so magic casters can't generally cast if they can be bound.
I see. All right.
And I don't want to remove their ability to cast, but with an similarly obvious image of magic being used, they don't lose their ability to cast, but there's still a persistent visualization for others to pick up on. So the threat is still there. They don't lose the ability. Just kind of thinking it through all the way, trying to piece it together.
No, I think it's a neat twist. I think it's definitely a neat twist. I think I just don't think you need to do the extra work of worrying about the mechanical things here. I mean, not that it's going to make or break it, but I don't think that the still spell ends up adding too many levels to what you're casting. It's like 1, 2, something like that.
I think it's 1.
Honestly, save yourself the effort. Don't even worry about the mechanics. Just say you don't need, you can sit there and psychically concentrate, and it's all a mental effort. There's the aura. Although what it does immediately make me think is, do permanently enchanted items have a continual heat shimmer around them?
Yes.
That would be my expectation in a world where I would expect that magic looks like that. Do static effects, if I've enchanted an area with an alarm spell, do I know to look for the heat shimmer? Like that kind of stuff would make me think, how does the world work differently given that thing? I think it's a great thing to seize on, because it's really easy for any player to think, I know something about this world. I know that magic is desert heat shimmer. I've seen that in the real world. I can envision that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would start to worry, well, okay, that does mean that I'm not going to be able to hide any magical effects as a DM.
I got to weigh on that.
Tell me, please.
All right, so there are certain things that kind of nullify magic. We have
the plot
areas.
Thickens. What do you got? All right.
Areas of nullify magic, which you would think, well, if it nullifies, then the magical effect is gone too. But if it's something as simple as an alarm spell, you would need your nullify over an alarm. So you cannot see it, but once you identify or dispel nullify, you see your alarm.
I'm not sure I understand completely. Are things like alarm, which are meant to be hidden, just by default less visible? Help me understand here.
Yeah, that's where we're gonna have to end up, because as I spoke that, I'm like, nope, I worded all that wrong.
Okay, never mind.
So yeah, try again. Something like super light spells, like your cantrips, etc. Barely even a blip.
Okay, so they're just hard to see. They're there, but they're very subtle.
Yeah, it does not take enough magical energy to cast dancing lights, for example, that it does to cast fireball at 9th level. That magical energy would be dependent on spell level, more powerful, more ability. And then again, permanent items would end up having a constant shimmer. Debatable on if it's been around for hundreds of years, if the shimmer would eventually go away or not. Most likely not, because the effect's still there. But hidden doors, things that are hidden by magical means, would probably need some sort of additional workaround, because we can't nullify. If somebody was hidden through invisibility as a spell effect versus a supernatural effect, the spell effect would be visible, the supernatural would not. Like innate abilities, I don't think I would affect. Primarily very similar to when you look at psionics versus magic. You can either rule them same but different, or you can different is different. And I would do supernatural is different than spell ability.
I want to offer a counter suggestion.
Please do.
So I would likely rule it differently than the way you're describing it. And the reason being that one of the things that I have found helps players engage most easily with the campaigns and the settings that I've tried to run is legibility. And I absolutely can understand why you'd like, look, this isn't magic, this is supernatural. But for a player who isn't going to sit there and think like, oh yeah, I understand the difference about that. That matters to me. They're gonna be like, that sounds like it's just magic with a different name. I think that the idea that magic produces a visual shimmer is a super easy thing for a player to grab. But if you start saying, but here's the provisos, the ifs and the ands and the buts, then I think it undermines the strength of that idea. And it makes it harder for the player to rely on that and to insert themselves into the world thinking, yeah, my character grew up in a world where magic does this, and I know that, and I can rely on that. If there's a bunch of gotchas, then you got to think like, oh, I got to remember all these other things, and it's not completely reliable as an idea. Because the more that you give them that they can say, I know this is true, and I can base my assumptions on this, the easier it is for them to riff on the idea and kind of do your work for you in a lot of places. So I'd actually say, just commit to the idea. Magic is shimmery. It means that invisibility spells, maybe they're not as effective. Maybe they concentrate more on being silent rather than invisible. It's a little more work for you, but if it makes it easier for the player to grab onto that as a core idea, that's a net benefit.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the key there that I really is just keep it simple.
Keep it simple, yeah. Don't make it hard. Life's hard enough. Let's.
I agree with that, and it's funny because we wanted to talk about like that idea behind world building, and we kind of went down this rabbit hole of some of the changes that I want to make to the game, and here I am trying to complicate it for myself. But if we just keep it simple, I think you're right. It'll track better for both my players, myself. Keep things going. It'll flow so much better, and that's really important.
I love high concept settings. I love stuff where, like this is the history and, there's all these different things. And players, even a dedicated player who really, like, they've got the time and the attention, the desire and the experience to show up and be one of those really great players, there's still kind of a maximum cognitive load that you can expect them to bear in any given scenario. And everything you ask them to remember has an opportunity cost of something down the line that they just won't be able to keep in their head without, bumping out something that happened earlier.
Right.
My ideal when I put together a new pitch for a campaign is I'm not asking them to read more than a single double-spaced page of text, bullet point style. And even that often ends up being a lot. Obviously, there's outliers in terms of what, some players want to read and can absorb and are willing to get into, but you got a double-spaced page. You got a double-spaced page of bullet points.
That's fair, because I'm looking at, a full campaign primer with enough lore to make somebody's head melt. And I don't want to give the whole thing to them, but
look, I'd read it, but I like that kind of stuff. I'm there for it.
Too. Yeah. Me too. All right, looking at time, I know we wanted to get to a certain point. I'll tell you what, Craig, you want to stick around? You want to join us for a while, right?
I think we got plenty more to talk about.
Awesome. So let's try to pick it up again next week. And I'm going to throw our listeners for a small loop right here, because I talked to you about this before the show, and I don't think we together have made a solid consensus, and that's okay. We have a week to do it. But we are going to change our name from the Epic Table Games audio show to something else. We have two high contenders that I have. Craig and I haven't. I don't know his opinion on it.
I have yet to conclude my meditations on the subject.
That is absolutely fair. We'll release the new name on Facebook when it happens. We'll get everything changed over. And guys, I'm trying to get the new website up and running so it's faster, more efficient, looks better, easier to navigate, and way more user-friendly. I know that it's not super bad right now, but Google says my score sucks. So we got to fix that. Other than that, guys, check us out on Facebook or epictablegames.com. We'll see you next time.
Roll dice, fantastic life. Make way for the paladins. Make way for the paladins. Epic Table Games. Make way for the paladins. Make way for the paladins. Epic Table Games. Thank you for listening to the Epic Table Games audio show with the Paladins of Podcasts, Rob and Josh. Until next time, stay in touch on Facebook at Epic Table Games and online at epictablegames.com. Epic Table